the fate of Earth was never decided in a courtroom, on a battlefield, or inside a government chamber. It was decided the moment one ordinary man stopped walking. Cold November rain drifted through downtown Seattle, turning the sidewalks into shimmering ribbons of reflected neon. City buses hissed at every corner. Coffee shops glowed behind fogged windows. Umbrellas floated past like dark clouds carried by hurried strangers who never looked twice at the people sitting beneath the awnings. Near the entrance of an aging subway station, a young woman sat quietly against the cold concrete wall. Her oversized gray coat looked several years too old. The sleeves covered most of her hands. Rainwater dripped from strands of platinum hair that framed a face almost too elegant for someone who supposedly owned nothing. A worn backpack rested beside her, nearly empty except for a dented metal bottle and a folded blanket. To everyone passing by, she looked like another homeless woman trying to survive another wet afternoon. Nobody noticed the nearly invisible ring around her wrist projecting microscopic waves into the air. Nobody noticed the tiny crystalline lens hidden beneath her left iris, silently recording every heartbeat, every facial expression, every word spoken within 200 feet. Somewhere far beyond Earth's atmosphere, hidden beyond conventional electromagnetic detection by a gravitational cloaking field, a silent observation vessel received every second of the transmission. No voices interrupted the data stream. No emotions colored the reports. Only numbers. Eye contact duration, compassion probability, avoidance rate, hostility index, trust response. Earth had been under observation for 121 days. Today was supposed to be the final evaluation. The woman lowered her eyes as another pair of expensive leather shoes walked past without slowing. Then another. A businessman glanced at her for less than half a second before checking his phone. Two teenagers laughed while stepping around her backpack. A tourist dropped a few coins without making eye contact, almost as if kindness could be completed without acknowledging another human being existed. She quietly picked up the coins and placed them beside an elderly veteran sleeping beneath the neighboring shelter instead. The hidden scanner beneath her skin registered another response. No witnesses, no recognition, no expectation of reward. Interesting. Her real name was Seraphine Asteris, daughter of the High Chancellor of the Celestial Accord and one of its youngest senior diplomatic observers. Although born into royalty, she had never stood in line to inherit the throne. Instead, she had devoted her life to studying emerging civilizations, believing that no statistic could replace seeing a people with her own eyes. On 23 worlds, her recommendation alone had changed the future of entire species. Most civilizations failed long before reaching this stage. They possessed remarkable technology but lacked empathy. Others valued order so highly that compassion became a weakness. Humanity remained the greatest uncertainty the Accord had ever encountered. Brilliant, creative, reckless, capable of extraordinary generosity and unimaginable cruelty within the same afternoon. No algorithm could predict them accurately. The Accord believed every civilization revealed its true character through the way it treated those who could offer nothing in return. Wealth attracted respect. Power attracted obedience. But only the forgotten revealed genuine compassion. That was why Seraphine had volunteered for the mission herself despite objections from the council. She had chosen the hardest disguise imaginable, not as royalty, not as an ambassador, not even as a traveler, but as someone the world had every reason to ignore. Another cold gust swept through the station entrance. She pulled the oversized coat tighter around her shoulders and watched the endless river of strangers continue forward without ever looking back. Then, almost imperceptibly, one pair of footsteps slowed. Not dramatically, not heroically, simply slowed. A man carrying a faded canvas tool bag paused beside a food cart across the street. He looked toward her for only a moment before turning to the vendor. Steam curled into the gray afternoon air as he purchased 2 bowls of hot soup. Instead of one, Seraphine's hidden sensors instantly recalculated thousands of behavioral outcomes. None of them predicted what would happen next. The man crossed the rain-soaked street with the careful pace of someone more concerned about spilling hot soup than getting wet himself. His work boots splashed through shallow puddles while steam escaped from the paper lids, disappearing into the chilly afternoon air. Seraphine kept her expression guarded, her eyes lowered just enough to resemble someone accustomed to being overlooked. Her wrist device quietly awakened beneath her sleeve, measuring his heartbeat, breathing rhythm, body temperature, and countless other biological markers. Stress levels remained ordinary. No elevated adrenaline. No hidden signs of fear. No detectable anticipation of recognition. Caleb Hayes stopped a few feet away, allowing enough distance to avoid making her feel cornered. His faded navy work jacket carried faint traces of machine oil, fresh rain, and cedar wood. His canvas tool bag rested against one leg while he carefully knelt, balancing one bowl on the dry section of the sidewalk between them. "I figured nobody should have hot soup alone on a day like this," he said with a small, almost embarrassed smile. "If you do not want it, that is completely okay." The translator embedded beneath Seraphine's skin converted every word instantly, but it could not explain the tone behind them. There was no pity in his voice, no performance, only simple sincerity delivered without expectation. She looked at the bowl before slowly raising her eyes toward him. "You do not know me," she answered softly. Caleb shrugged. "That is true." She waited. Most species always followed kindness with conditions. Identification, background, loyalty, gratitude. Instead, he simply added, "People usually have a story before they have an address." Her internal processor flagged the sentence for immediate archival. Unexpected philosophical response. Probability of rehearsed empathy, less than 1%. She accepted the soup with both hands. The warmth seeped through the paper container and into her cold fingers. It had been decades since she had actually needed food, but consuming local meals had become part of maintaining her disguise. The scent of roasted chicken, vegetables, black pepper, and fresh herbs rose with the steam. Caleb sat on the opposite end of the bench nearby, leaving several feet between them. He opened his own bowl and quietly began eating without watching her. Silence settled naturally between them. Cars rolled through the intersection. A train rumbled beneath the street. Somewhere nearby, a street musician struggled through an old jazz melody on a weathered saxophone. Nobody paid attention to the man sharing lunch with a stranger. Seraphine took her first spoonful. The broth was simple, ordinary by every measurable culinary standard. Yet her sensors recorded something impossible to quantify. The meal had not been selected for efficiency. It had been chosen because someone believed another person might feel warmer afterward. Across the solar system, civilizations engineered nutrition with flawless precision. Humanity still seasoned theirs with memory. "What is your name?" Caleb finally asked. She hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. "Sarah," she replied, using the identity prepared for the mission. He nodded once. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. I am Caleb." He offered no handshake, understanding she might not want physical contact. Another unexpected adjustment. The observation vessel orbiting beyond Earth's atmosphere updated its prediction models again. Human subject Caleb Hayes continued producing behavioral outcomes that exceeded established expectations. Seraphine looked beyond him as more pedestrians hurried through the rain without noticing either of them. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she wondered if her mission had never truly been about evaluating humanity. Perhaps it was about discovering whether the measurements her civilization trusted had been missing the most important variable all along. That evening, the rain finally eased, leaving behind streets washed clean beneath rows of amber streetlights. Reflections shimmered across the pavement as if the city itself had become a quiet river of gold and glass. Caleb finished his soup, folded the empty container neatly into a nearby recycling bin, then returned carrying a small paper bag from the same food cart. Without saying a word, he placed it beside Seraphine before slipping his hands into the pockets of his jacket. "Breakfast," he said simply. "The bakery throws away good bread at closing time. They let me buy it for almost nothing." Seraphine looked inside. 2 fresh rolls, a crisp apple, and a small packet of butter rested carefully inside. None of it was expensive. Every item had been chosen because it would last through the night. Her wrist device silently recorded another anomaly. Resource allocation without expectation of return. Emotional motivation remained consistent. "Why?" she finally asked. Caleb looked across the street where commuters hurried toward the last evening bus. "Because somebody once did the same thing for me." He smiled faintly, though there was an old sadness behind it. "Years ago, I lost almost everything after my dad got sick. I learned something during that time. Most people do not need someone to fix their whole life. Sometimes they just need tomorrow to look a little less impossible." The words settled into the cool evening air. Seraphine searched his face for signs of deception. There were none. Her civilization considered emotional transparency inefficient. Every gesture carried strategic value. Every favor strengthened alliances or created obligations. Yet Caleb continued speaking as though kindness required no explanation at all. He checked the time on an old wristwatch whose scratched crystal had clearly survived years of work. There is a community kitchen a few blocks from here. They serve breakfast every morning. If you want, I can show you where it is. Nobody asks questions there. He immediately added, only if you are comfortable. Again, he offered a choice instead of direction. Another unexpected adjustment. Seraphine nodded once. Thank you. They walked together through quiet streets lined with maple trees already shedding their last orange leaves. Caleb never walked too close, never too far ahead. He matched her pace naturally, occasionally greeting familiar shop owners closing for the evening. A florist sweeping rainwater from the sidewalk waved at him. A delivery driver thanked him for helping repair a broken loading ramp the week before. A little girl exiting an apartment building ran toward him with an excited grin. Mr. Hayes, my bike works again. Caleb laughed softly. I am glad to hear it. Mom says thank you again. Tell your mom she still owes me exactly one smile. The little girl giggled before disappearing inside with her mother. Seraphine watched every interaction. None appeared rehearsed. None suggested someone trying to build a reputation. People simply seemed happy to see him. Hidden high above the clouds, the observation vessel recalculated its assessment once more. Human social influence exceeded projected parameters despite minimal economic status. Correlation between generosity and community trust rising beyond expected models. Seraphine remained silent until they reached a modest brick building where warm light spilled through broad windows onto the sidewalk. Through the glass, she could see volunteers arranging folding tables while the smell of fresh coffee drifted into the cool night air. Caleb pointed toward the entrance. They open at 7 tomorrow morning. You will not be alone here. He offered one last gentle smile before lifting his canvas tool bag onto his shoulder. Take care, Sarah. Then he walked away without asking where she would sleep, without requesting gratitude, and without looking back to see whether she was still watching. Seraphine stood motionless beneath the streetlight as invisible data continued flowing toward the stars. For the first time since accepting the mission, she quietly interrupted the automated report with words of her own. Observation Log 122. Human subject Caleb Hayes continues to produce behaviors not explained by existing Accord behavioral models. Recommend suspension of preliminary conclusions. Humanity may require a different way of measuring civilization. Morning arrived wrapped in pale silver clouds that softened the skyline without hiding it. The city stirred awake with the familiar rhythm of delivery trucks, distant ferry horns, and the rich aroma of roasted coffee drifting through damp streets. Seraphine stood across from the community kitchen exactly as the clock above a nearby bank turned to 7. Volunteers unlocked the front doors with easy smiles, greeting each arriving guest by name whenever they could. Nobody stood in separate lines. Nobody wore signs that measured success or failure. Construction workers shared tables with retirees. College students laughed beside veterans. A young mother quietly accepted a tray while balancing a sleepy toddler on her shoulder. The room felt less like a shelter and more like a family that simply kept making room for one more chair. Caleb was already there wearing the same navy work jacket, now covered by a simple volunteer apron. Steam rose from large stainless steel pots as he carefully filled bowls with oatmeal, fresh fruit, and scrambled eggs. Every few minutes he greeted someone with the same calm warmth he had shown the night before. Good morning, Frank. Glad you made it, Mrs. Alvarez. How is your grandson doing? There was never any rush in his voice, even though dozens of people continued entering through the doors. When Seraphine stepped inside, Caleb noticed her almost immediately. His expression brightened with quiet relief, as though he had genuinely hoped she would come. Good morning, Sarah, he said. I saved you a seat near the window. The sunlight usually reaches that table first. She accepted the tray he offered. Again, he asked nothing about her past. No questions about family. No questions about money. No questions about why she had been sleeping outside. The absence of curiosity puzzled her more each passing hour. Most advanced civilizations considered information the foundation of trust. Caleb appeared to believe trust sometimes came before information. As breakfast continued, Seraphine watched him help wherever someone needed an extra pair of hands. He carried supplies into the kitchen for an elderly volunteer whose knees no longer allowed heavy lifting. He repaired a loose cabinet hinge with a small screwdriver from his tool bag before anyone even mentioned it. When the coffee machine suddenly stopped working, he quietly removed the back panel, tightened a worn electrical connection, and had fresh coffee flowing again within minutes. Nobody applauded. Nobody acted surprised. They simply thanked him, and he smiled as though helping had never interrupted his morning. Across the room, an elderly woman noticed Seraphine sitting alone. She carried over a knitted scarf colored deep forest green and gently placed it beside her tray. "Winter comes early around here," she said softly. "I made this last week. It will keep your neck warm." Seraphine reached for the scarf with careful hands. The fibers were uneven in places, revealing that it had been made slowly rather than perfectly. Her sensors estimated nearly 12 hours of patient work stitched into every row. The woman never asked for payment. She simply returned to her breakfast after wishing her a peaceful day. Hidden beneath Seraphine's sleeve, the observation device briefly paused before reopening several encrypted files. Existing behavioral models continued failing. Acts of generosity were appearing independently across unrelated individuals with no obvious strategic benefit. Later that morning, Caleb removed his apron and prepared to leave for work. Before stepping outside, he stopped beside her table. "I talked with the director here," he said. "They always need an extra set of hands organizing donations. Nothing complicated. Just a few hours whenever you feel ready. No pressure. Sometimes having somewhere to be makes tomorrow easier to find." Seraphine looked into his steady blue eyes, searching once more for any hidden motive. She found only quiet hope offered without obligation. As he disappeared into the brightening morning, she realized something that unsettled every lesson her civilization had ever taught her. Humanity did not seem to measure another person's worth by what they possessed. The people she had met measured it by whether they still deserved a place at the table. The following week unfolded beneath clear autumn skies that painted Seattle in quiet shades of amber and gold. Morning sunlight filtered through maple branches outside the community kitchen, casting gentle patterns across the sidewalk as volunteers unloaded boxes of donated food from pickup trucks. Seraphine arrived before sunrise each day, wearing the same weathered coat and carrying the same worn backpack. To everyone around her, she remained Sarah, another woman trying to rebuild her life one ordinary morning at a time. The work itself was simple. She sorted canned goods, stacked blankets, organized winter coats by size, and carried boxes from the storage room into the dining hall. Every task could have been completed instantly using the hidden technology woven beneath her clothing. Yet she forced herself to move at a human pace. She wanted to understand not only what humans accomplished, but how they treated one another while accomplishing it. Caleb appeared every morning before heading to his maintenance job across the city. Sometimes he repaired a leaking faucet before breakfast service began. Other days he replaced loose light fixtures or fixed broken chairs with quiet efficiency. He never announced what he had done. People simply noticed that things worked a little better after he visited. One afternoon, while organizing donated clothing, Seraphine deliberately conducted the first unscripted phase of her evaluation. She quietly slipped a small leather wallet beneath a folding table where volunteers frequently walked past. Inside was local currency, identification cards created for her undercover identity, and several family photographs generated by the mission's artificial intelligence. According to Accord behavioral models, the wallet should trigger measurable self-interest in at least one observer before the end of the day. Nearly an hour passed. Dozens of people walked by without noticing it. Then Caleb arrived carrying a toolbox over one shoulder. He stopped immediately after spotting the wallet. Without opening it, without checking its contents, he picked it up and carried it directly to the front desk. "Someone is probably worried sick," he said to the volunteer coordinator. "Maybe they will come looking for it." He left before anyone could even thank him. Seraphine silently retrieved the wallet later that afternoon after confirming every item remained untouched. Her wrist device recalculated once again. Behavioral prediction failure. She initiated a second evaluation the following day. While helping prepare lunch, she intentionally dropped an entire tray of fresh bread onto the kitchen floor. Several volunteers turned toward the unexpected noise. She waited for irritation, disappointment, or blame. Instead, an elderly man laughed softly before grabbing a broom. "Good thing bread does not bruise our feelings," he joked. Another volunteer smiled as she gathered fresh loaves from the pantry. "We have plenty. Everybody drops something sooner or later." Caleb looked over from the sink where he had been repairing a loose water valve. "The first day I volunteered here, I spilled an entire pot of chili," he admitted with a grin. "Trust me, today is going much better than that." The room filled with gentle laughter before everyone simply continued working together. No embarrassment lingered. No one kept score. That evening, hidden above Earth's atmosphere, Seraphine stood alone inside the observation chamber aboard the invisible Accord vessel. Thousands of holographic reports floated around her, each filled with flawless statistics gathered over 4 months. According to the numbers, humanity remained inconsistent, emotionally unpredictable, and strategically inefficient. According to her own eyes, however, those same flaws allowed complete strangers to forgive mistakes before assigning blame, to trust before demanding proof, and to help before calculating personal gain. She quietly opened a secure transmission to the High Council and recorded a message without consulting the automated system. Interim recommendation. Delay final judgment. Existing evaluation methods are insufficient. Humanity cannot be understood through outcomes alone. Their civilization is hidden inside the countless ordinary choices they make when they believe nobody is watching. 3 days later, the city awakened beneath a sky so clear that Mount Rainier stood against the horizon like a painted monument, its snow-covered summit glowing beneath the first light of dawn. The air carried the crisp scent of cedar and fallen leaves, and people lingered a little longer on sidewalks before beginning another ordinary workday. At the community kitchen, volunteers prepared for the annual Neighborhood Appreciation Lunch, an event where anyone could eat regardless of circumstance. Folding tables filled the courtyard outside, decorated with handmade centerpieces crafted by children from the nearby elementary school. Caleb spent the early morning adjusting loose table legs, checking extension cords for the outdoor coffee stations, and replacing several burned-out bulbs beneath the entrance canopy. He moved from one task to another with the steady confidence of someone who believed small details mattered because people mattered. Seraphine worked beside several volunteers arranging fresh flowers donated by a local florist. Every smile she received felt genuine. Every thank you arrived without hesitation. She had now lived among humans long enough to recognize a pattern no Accord algorithm had anticipated. Their kindness was rarely spectacular. It appeared instead through dozens of quiet decisions repeated every single day. Shortly before noon, her concealed communicator vibrated beneath her sleeve with a priority signal that bypassed every security protocol. She stepped into an empty storage room and activated the microscopic projection hidden inside her wrist device. A translucent figure appeared only inches above her palm. It was Chancellor Vaylor, senior representative of the Celestial Accord. His expression remained composed, though his voice carried unmistakable urgency. Observer Seraphine Asteris, your mission has exceeded its authorized duration. The Council has completed its independent statistical review. Earth remains classified as emotionally unstable and strategically unpredictable. Final recommendation is prepared for ratification. Seraphine remained silent for a moment before answering. The statistical review is incomplete. Your personal observations are considered anecdotal. My observations involve millions of choices your statistics cannot measure. The Chancellor folded his hands. Compassion is admirable but inefficient. Civilizations are evaluated through stability, not sentiment. Seraphine looked through the small storage room window toward the courtyard where Caleb had paused to help a little boy tie one untied shoelace before returning to his work without attracting attention. Perhaps stability grows because of sentiment, she replied quietly. The Chancellor studied her without speaking. Finally, he said, you know the Charter as well as anyone. As the Accord's lead field observer for Earth's evaluation, you possess the authority to file a formal objection. Until that objection is resolved, no final admission vote can legally proceed. Seraphine met his gaze without hesitation. Then consider this my formal objection. The hologram remained silent for several seconds before responding. You understand the consequences. Your judgment will be reviewed alongside the civilization you are defending. I do, she answered. Then the Council will determine whether your objectivity has been compromised. No, she replied calmly. They should determine whether our methods have. Without waiting for permission, she ended the transmission. The projection disappeared, leaving only the faint reflection of her own face in the dark window. Outside, laughter drifted across the courtyard as families gathered around long tables. Caleb noticed her standing alone and walked over carrying 2 cups of hot apple cider. He handed one to her without asking why she looked troubled. Sometimes a warm drink helps more than good advice, he said with an easy smile. She accepted the cup, feeling its warmth settle into her hands. How did you know something was wrong? Caleb looked toward the children chasing one another across the grass. I did not. He shrugged gently. But everyone has days when the world feels heavier than usual. Seraphine lowered her eyes to the rising steam. Across dozens of star systems, she had negotiated trade agreements, resolved political conflicts, and spoken before entire planetary assemblies without uncertainty. Yet one ordinary human offering a cup of warm cider without demanding an explanation unsettled her more deeply than any diplomatic challenge she had ever faced. High above the Earth, hidden beyond every telescope and satellite, the observation vessel received her interrupted transmission and automatically marked her evaluation profile with a new designation. Formal objection filed. Final ratification suspended. Observer integrity under review. Possible emotional contamination detected. For the first time since the mission had begun, Seraphine realized the greatest test might no longer belong to humanity. It might belong to her. The celebration continued beneath strings of warm lights as afternoon slowly melted into evening. Children chased one another across the courtyard carrying paper pinwheels, while neighbors lingered over homemade desserts and fresh coffee. Soft acoustic music floated through the crisp autumn air, blending with laughter that rose and faded like gentle waves. Seraphine stood near the edge of the gathering, quietly helping collect empty plates while her thoughts remained fixed on the message from the Celestial Accord. She knew the High Council would not delay the review much longer. Their preliminary recommendation had already been drafted, but her formal objection had suspended the final ratification. She knew that delay would not last forever. Her report was becoming the only obstacle. Caleb noticed she had barely touched the apple pie someone had insisted she take. He smiled as he folded another stack of chairs. "You have been looking at the sky a lot lately." She glanced upward instinctively before answering. "Maybe I am trying to decide where I belong." Caleb considered the answer for a moment instead of replying immediately. "I used to think belonging was a place," he said quietly. "Now I think it is the people who are glad you showed up." Before Seraphine could respond, every light across the courtyard flickered once. Then again, conversations gradually faded as people looked around in mild confusion. The decorative lights dimmed before returning brighter than before. Phones briefly lost signal. The electronic clock above the community center froze for exactly 3 seconds. No one panicked. Most assumed it was another temporary power fluctuation. Seraphine knew better. She could feel the familiar resonance vibrating beneath the atmosphere. An Accord retrieval vessel had entered low orbital position. They had come for her. Hidden within the lining of her coat, the emergency communicator activated automatically. A single sentence appeared in silent silver characters across her wrist. Observer Seraphine Asterisk. Immediate extraction authorized. Compliance required. She closed her hand, making the message disappear. Across the courtyard, Caleb was helping an elderly couple carry several containers of leftover food toward their car. He smiled as he thanked every volunteer individually before returning inside for another load. He had absolutely no idea that the woman he knew as Sarah was one of the most influential diplomatic observers in the galaxy. He only knew someone who occasionally smiled more than she had a month ago. A cool breeze drifted through the trees, carrying golden leaves across the parking lot. Above the clouds, invisible to every human eye, a thin column of pale light briefly shimmered between the stars before vanishing again. Seraphine stepped quietly away from the celebration toward the empty playground behind the building. Swings moved gently in the evening wind. Fallen leaves collected beneath a weathered slide. The air around her suddenly rippled like water touched by unseen rain. 3 tall figures emerged from the distortion, dressed in elegant silver uniforms that reflected the fading sunlight. Their expressions remained calm and unreadable. None carried weapons. None needed to. The leader inclined his head respectfully. "Your Highness, the Council requests your immediate return." Seraphine remained still. "The evaluation is unfinished. The High Council requires your presence before deliberations continue." Then the Council is mistaken. For the first time, surprise crossed the commander's composed face. "You intend to challenge centuries of Accord evaluation protocols." She slowly looked back toward the community center where warm light spilled through the windows. Through the glass, she could see Caleb laughing with several volunteers while washing dishes, completely unaware that history was quietly shifting only a few hundred feet away. "No," she answered softly. "I intend to complete my duty." At that exact moment, the back door opened. Caleb stepped outside carrying 2 bags of trash toward the recycling bins. He paused when he noticed 3 unfamiliar strangers standing with Sarah beneath the old maple tree. They looked impossibly graceful, their silver clothing unlike anything he had ever seen, their posture carrying the effortless confidence of people accustomed to commanding worlds. One of them turned slightly, as if sensing his presence. Seraphine slowly closed her eyes. The moment she had hoped to postpone had finally arrived. Caleb stood motionless beside the recycling bins, one paper bag still hanging loosely from his hand as the cool evening breeze carried a handful of golden leaves between him and the three strangers. For several long seconds nobody spoke. The silver uniforms shimmered with a subtle glow unlike any fabric woven on earth, reflecting the courtyard lights with impossible precision. Yet it was not their appearance that caught his attention. It was the way they looked at Sarah. Not with curiosity, not with authority alone, with unmistakable respect. The commander inclined his head once more. "Your Highness, further delay is no longer authorized." Caleb blinked, uncertain whether he had misunderstood what he had just heard. "Highness." The word lingered in the quiet air as though the night itself had paused to listen. Sarah slowly reached toward the collar of her worn gray coat and released a nearly invisible clasp. The old fabric slipped gently from her shoulders, revealing elegant clothing beneath, woven from luminous threads that shifted like moonlight across still water. The transformation contained no spectacle, no dramatic flash of light. It felt quieter than that, more like someone finally allowing the truth to breathe. Her platinum hair caught the evening light, and the calm dignity that had always rested beneath her disguise suddenly became impossible to overlook. Caleb remained silent. His eyes moved from the silver uniforms to Seraphine, then toward the quiet sky above the maple trees. Nothing in 34 years of ordinary life had prepared him for this moment. He slowly let out the breath he did not realize he had been holding. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. "So, your name is not really Sarah." She met his eyes with quiet regret. "No," she answered softly. "My name is Seraphine Asteris." She stepped closer, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves above them. "I came to Earth as an observer from the Celestial Accord. My mission was to determine whether humanity possessed the character required to join a peaceful alliance shared by many civilizations." Caleb looked from Seraphine to the silent visitors and back again. Questions filled his mind, yet none seemed as important as the expression on her face. She looked relieved to stop pretending, but also deeply afraid of what honesty might cost. "So everything was a test?" he asked quietly. Seraphine lowered her eyes. "It began as one." She hesitated before continuing. "I believed I understood civilizations because I understood statistics. I believed compassion could be measured. Then I met people who kept helping one another even when no reward existed." Her voice trembled almost imperceptibly. "You changed the way I see an entire species." The commander stepped forward with measured composure. "Observer Seraphine has completed her field assignment. The Council's statistical review recommends that humanity be classified as emotionally inconsistent and therefore unsuitable for admission. However, under Accord law, her formal objection has suspended the final ratification until the High Council completes its review." Caleb frowned slightly, not out of anger but confusion. "Based on what?" The commander answered without emotion. "Historical conflict, resource instability, behavioral unpredictability." Caleb nodded slowly, considering every word. Then he looked toward the brightly lit community center where volunteers continued laughing while washing dishes together, completely unaware that representatives from another civilization stood only yards away. "You have a lot of numbers," he said. "But did any of you ever eat breakfast with us?" Silence followed. "Did you help fix a broken chair? Sit beside someone who thought nobody cared anymore? Watch neighbors bring homemade soup to a family because somebody got sick?" His voice remained calm. "People are messy. We always have been. But most of us keep trying anyway." Even the commander seemed unable to answer immediately. Seraphine looked at Caleb with quiet admiration, realizing he had unknowingly summarized everything her reports had failed to express. She turned toward the Accord delegation and lifted her chin. "My official recommendation remains unchanged," she declared with steady conviction. "The Council's models are incomplete. Humanity should not be judged only by the worst moments recorded in history. They should also be judged by the ordinary kindness that history almost never records." High above Earth, hidden aboard the observation vessel, her formal objection and revised report arrived before the High Council. For the first time in generations, the final vote remained suspended while every delegate was ordered to review evidence that no statistical model had ever been designed to measure. Entire worlds waited as months of numerical certainty gave way to something far more difficult to calculate. Hope. The silence that followed seemed to stretch far beyond the courtyard, beyond the city lights, beyond the blue sky itself. Minutes later, the commander's communicator emitted a single clear tone. He raised his wrist, reading the incoming transmission as his composed expression shifted for the first time. Surprise gave way to reflection. Then, with deliberate care, he looked directly at Seraphine and slowly lowered his head. Updated directive received from the High Council, he announced. Your formal objection has been accepted. The final vote has been reopened, and a full diplomatic review has been ordered. The words drifted through the cool night air like the first warm breeze after a long winter. Seraphine closed her eyes for only a heartbeat. She understood exactly what that meant. No lead field observer had ever persuaded the council to suspend a final ratification after the statistical review had already been completed. It had never happened because numbers had always spoken louder than experience. Until now, the Accord delegation departed as quietly as they had arrived, disappearing into the gentle distortion of light that slowly dissolved beneath the stars. The courtyard returned to stillness. Caleb looked at Seraphine with the same calm expression she had first seen beneath the subway awning weeks earlier. There was curiosity in his eyes, but no resentment. So, he said with a gentle smile, I guess you have had a busy month. She laughed softly for the first time without hiding who she truly was. That is one way to describe it. He nodded toward the community center. There is still pie inside if interstellar royalty eats apple pie. She smiled a little wider. I believe interstellar royalty should probably start. The weeks that followed became the most comprehensive diplomatic observation in the history of the Celestial Accord. This time there were no hidden algorithms judging from orbit. Council representatives walked human streets. They volunteered beside ordinary families. They rode crowded buses. They visited schools, repair shops, libraries, neighborhood diners, parks, and community kitchens. They witnessed arguments ending with apologies instead of pride. They watched neighbors shovel snow from driveways that were not their own. They saw children invite lonely classmates to birthday parties without being asked. They discovered that humanity was not extraordinary because every person was kind. Humanity was extraordinary because kindness continued appearing despite every reason it should have disappeared. 3 months later, governments across Earth detected an immense object entering high orbit. Emergency briefings began within minutes. Military tracking systems locked onto the unidentified vessel. Air traffic controllers received temporary advisories. News networks interrupted their regular programming as millions of people watched live images of a graceful silver craft hanging peacefully above the planet. Before fear could spread, every government, every satellite network, every phone, television, radio station, and public display received the same transmission at precisely the same moment. People of Earth, the Celestial Accord extends its hand in friendship. Your civilization has been accepted, not because you are perfect, but because you continue choosing compassion even when perfection is impossible. The report that changed our decision began with a princess disguised as someone the world could have ignored, and ended with a stranger who chose kindness when he believed nobody was watching. Around the world, silence arrived before celebration. Then strangers embraced. Children pointed excitedly toward the brilliant vessel above the clouds. In the small Seattle community kitchen where everything had quietly begun, volunteers paused with tears shining in their eyes. Caleb simply smiled and returned to pouring coffee before the oatmeal grew cold. An hour later, the front door opened. Seraphine stepped inside wearing no disguise, no worn gray coat, and no hidden communicator. Her luminous attire reflected the soft morning light, yet the green knitted scarf still rested around her shoulders. Every conversation gently faded as people recognized her. She walked directly to Caleb and held out a simple laminated volunteer badge printed with one familiar name. Sarah. I asked if I could keep it, she said quietly. It reminds me of the person I became because of this world. Caleb looked at the badge, then at her, and smiled. Breakfast is almost ready. Would you like to help? She accepted the apron he offered without hesitation and tied it over clothing worth more than entire starships. Together they carried steaming bowls toward waiting guests while sunlight streamed through the windows. Far above, diplomats from dozens of worlds silently watched the princess of the Celestial Accord serving breakfast beside an ordinary human mechanic. They did not see royalty lowering herself. They saw the future of their own civilization. From that day forward, every new world evaluated by the Accord would first be tested the same way Seraphine had tested Earth, not by measuring its wealth or its power, but by asking a far simpler question. How does it treat the stranger who has nothing to offer in return? And beneath the warm morning light, with a volunteer apron covering royal garments and a handmade green scarf wrapped around her shoulders, the woman who had once pretended to be homeless smiled as the galaxy quietly admitted that humanity had not merely passed the test. Humanity had rewritten the test forever.